Just to give some context, I currently live in the UK, and the town where I live is known for its drug scene, but it doesn't really have a violent crime problem to speak of. I think that's why I found what happened so shocking, because I lived in London before, and while some messed up stuff happened to me there, it was nowhere near on the level of what happened to me earlier this year. My partner and I live together in our flat, which is in a relatively busy residential area. I work from home however, and he's out of the flat quite a lot, so I guess it might look to an outside observer like I live alone. Our flat complex was once an old factory, and we have these huge industrial windows, so people walking on the street have a pretty clear view of our dining room, which is where I work during the day. It all started in July of this year. I'm ashamed to say that I can be a major rubbernecker, and a lot of drama occurs on the road outside of our flat. So I look out of the window often during my workday for some light entertainment. The best was a 2-hour breakup I got to watch unfold in the car just below our window, but that's besides the point. One day, I got up to make myself a cup of tea, looked out of the kitchen window and saw this guy just staring at me. I was struck by how intense it was and how he didn't even look away, even when it was obvious that I was looking back at him. I felt creeped out by it, but I tried not to let it bother me. We have a lot of drug addicts and other weird characters that hang around here, so it didn't really seem like that's such a big a deal. I went back to work, and by the time I sat down at the table, he was gone. About a week later, my partner had gone to visit his dad for the weekend, so I was excited to hunker down and catch up on some of my favourite shows alone. After about 30 minutes, the buzzer to the flat went. The buzzer is so loud and it scared the heck out of me. I was quite lucky my popcorn didn't fly out of my hands. Now, our flat complex has a big porch where teenagers and addicts love to hang out because it provides shelter from the rain and about 4 people can sit down inside of it. Sometimes people lean up on the buzzers by accident when they're hanging out in the porch, so I assume that's what happened this time. After a few seconds however, the buzzer went again, and again, and again. Someone was pressing it in a rhythmic pattern. It's something I know my partner does when he's forgotten his keys, and it's kind of our code for me to let him in, which is why I found it so disconcerting. At first, I was worried he might have missed the bus to his dad's house and decided to come back to the flat. I was nearly about to buzz him straight in when I thought it'd be a good idea to pick up the phone and check who it was. As soon as I picked up the phone, the person standing near the intercom must have heard because they said, "Hello?" It was definitely not my partner. I asked who it was and why they were buzzing the flat so late at night, but all they said was, "Can you let me in?" I asked them why they wanted to come in and they said, "You invited me, remember?" While they were talking, they kept kind of laughing under their breath, and the whole exchange put me on edge. I told them I had no idea who they were and just hung up. I was half expecting them to start pressing the buzzer again, but they didn't. After a few minutes, I crept out of the flat to have a look at who was in the porch, but they were long gone. My partner has to get up early for work, whereas I'm more of a night owl. Most nights, I'm up until around 2 or 3 AM working on my laptop while he's asleep. A few nights after the intercom incident, I was on my laptop watching YouTube videos and I realised we forgot to take the trash out. This happens quite a lot, and it's not uncommon for me to take the trash out at around 1 or 2 AM. At least, it wasn't until all this happened. I put my slippers on, grabbed the bag of trash and took it out to the curb outside the flat's main entrance. When I looked across the street, there was a guy standing on the opposite street corner. He was watching me, and his eyes followed me all the way from the front door to the curb. I noticed he was smoking, so I assumed he lived in one of the houses across the street. I remember even thinking, wouldn't it be creepy if he tried to come over here? As I put the trash bag down, I caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye. I looked up and saw him walking in a straight line across the road towards me, with his eyes fixed on me the entire time. I don't know how to describe it, but the look on his face filled me with this instinctive sense of dread. It felt like someone had just turned my stomach inside out. I pulled my keys out of my hoodie pocket, turned around and ran to the front door. I've never felt that kind of fear before, and it was like my body was compelling me to get as far away from that man as possible. I got into the building, slammed the door behind me, and rushed to my flat without looking back. I did not want to know whether he followed me or not. I told my partner about the whole thing the next day and how shook up I was. We agreed that we'd be more proactive with the trash, and I've never taken it out late at night again. Fast forward to the beginning of August, about 2 weeks after the trash incident, and I'd pretty much forgotten all about it. I was still too scared to go out late at night on the road, but nothing weird had happened since then. I went to bed at about 2 AM, but I felt restless for some reason and I struggled to get to sleep. By about 3 AM, I was contemplating whether or not to give up and go do something else, when I heard this scream. The sound cut right through me. There was just something odd about the terror in that scream. I knew it was bad because my partner went from being stone cold asleep to being up in a shot. He asked me what it was, and I said I didn't know. I went to the window straight away and looked out. Down one of the side roads near our flat, I could see headlights but couldn't get a clear view of the car. The screaming continued in bursts, and after a while I could make out words. It was a woman and she was saying, "Get out, get out," over and over again. I'm used to hearing all kinds of domestic arguments take place on the road outside of our flat, particularly since we're near a university and several popular bars, but this was different. There was this raw fear in her voice that made the hairs on my arms stand up. I turned to my partner and said I had to call the police. When they picked up and I explained what was happening, they seemed disinterested at first, but the operator's tone changed when I told them where it was. I think they must have been getting calls from all around the area about it. It was sometime during this phone call that I heard a screech of tires and the screaming stopped. The operator asked me to go to the window and describe to them what was happening. When I looked down, there was this black car sat on the road. One of the neighbors from across the road was speaking to the two guys in the car. I had to twist to get a good look at them, but one of the guys in the car looked uncannily like the guy who was been watching me when I was putting out the trash that time. At first, the conversation seemed normal, but it took a turn when the neighbor asked them some sort of question that I couldn't hear clearly, and they sped off down the road. Within no less than 10 minutes, 3 police cars arrived and had blocked off the roads leading to our flat. They were knocking on doors and asking to speak to all of our neighbors. I told my partner that we should go out and speak to them since we saw a lot of what happened, and my partner had the foresight to write down the license plate of the black car. When we went out, there were these 2 girls talking to one of the police officers. They were both shaking, and one of them looked like they had been crying. I decided to stand by and wait for the girls to finish before speaking with the officer myself. What they said made my blood run cold. They were from one of the houses that looked out directly onto the road where I'd seen the headlights, so they had a clear view of what happened. Like us, they had been alerted by the screaming and had gone straight to the window. From what they could gather, the black car had cut off a small red car on the road, and that's what caused the girl driving the red car to scream the first time. They thought that it might have just been some misunderstanding, but then they watched as one of the guys from the black car got out, walked to the red car, and jumped in through the window. That's the point when the girl must have been screaming, "Get out, get out." There had been a struggle, and the girls watching said they assumed the guy was just trying to steal the car, but then he forced the driver into the back seat, and that's when he drove off. The 2 girls were both hysterical by this point, and you could tell they felt guilty for not intervening. I could feel the same guilt seeping into my thoughts as well. After the guy had driven off in the red car, the 2 men in the black car had gone the opposite way and turned the corner onto our road, but had been stopped by another neighbour. Although this neighbour had been alerted by the screaming, he hadn't actually witnessed what happened. He had stopped the black car to ask the guys what was going on without knowing they were involved. That was the exchange we saw from our window. When the guys started acting suspicious, he asked them if they'd wait for the police to arrive, and that's the point when they drove off. It wasn't until we got back to the flat that I started to put two and two together. I have a small red car, just like the one the girls had described, and I normally come back at night on that day of the week, since it was the day I go and visit my parents. I had only come back early on this particular occasion because I needed to let a plumber in to do some work on the flat. What if they had been waiting for me and they had gotten the wrong car? Over the next few days, I contacted the police several times and checked the local news, but I never heard anything about the girl who was kidnapped. And I still have no idea what happened to her. All I know is that they found her car abandoned somewhere not far from when she was taken, but she was not in it. It still gives me chills just thinking about it. Back in 2005-2006, sometime in the summer, I was visiting my grandmother's grave in a huge cemetery that looked over the Bay Area. That was about 30 minutes from my house. I took my friend with me because she liked creeping around in graveyards and didn't really think it was weird. I did my routine, bought some flowers at a nearby grocery store and took them up to my grandmother's grave. As we're driving out of the cemetery, my friend spots some older graves off to the side and asked me to stop so we can look around. I pulled over on the other side of the road from these graves and we got out of the car and started walking towards them. The patch of lawn they were in was small and highly neglected, with overgrown grass and weeds and gravestones that were battered and had water damage so bad that you couldn't even read half of them. These were probably the oldest graves in the cemetery, dating back to the 1800s. My friend was way ahead of me, already walking through the graves and reading what she could on the gravestones. And for some reason, not knowing why, I slowed down and got an overwhelming feeling of dread and not wanting to be there. I called out to my friend and said, "Hey, I don't think we should be here." And all of a sudden, we heard a loud noise and both of us jumped up and started running back to the car. We get to my car and the passenger window is completely blown out with glass shattered both in and outside of my car. I was in such a panic that I called my mum and told her what happened, clearly freaked out, and she told me that some kid must have thrown a rock at my window or something. What kids, mum? We're in a cemetery. There's nobody around. There were no broken branches, there were no rocks. Nothing was there to give me an explanation on why my window blew out the way it did. My friend and I drove back to our town in complete silence. That day will forever stay with me. This story is slightly different as it was more strange than creepy. It happened back in 2004 when I was 12 years old. It was autumn, the beginning of the school year, but the weather was still uncharacteristically warm and the dark nights of Northern Europe had not kicked in yet. I was playing outside with my best friend Kirsten. We were sitting and talking on a large rock in front of my apartment complex, right under my window. I don't remember how long we'd been there until we see a man we'd not seen before walk towards us. I say man, but he had that baby face going on where he could have been anywhere from 18 to 35. At first we didn't pay him any attention, but as he reached us, he came and sat right next to me, put his arm around me and said, "Sarah, finally, where have you been? I've been looking all over for you." At this point, Kirsten laughs, thinking it's a boyfriend of mine that I didn't tell her about. Except, it isn't. I've never seen this man in my life. Yes, we lived in a small town, but it wasn't small enough for you to know everybody there, and I was definitely not popular enough for a stranger to know my name. Now, a lot of weird things happened often in my hometown, from gunfights to explosions. Kirsten and I made friends with a criminal convicted of chopping 2 people into pieces. We'd also been chased with an axe by a weird alcoholic guy who lived in the forest, so we knew that some people can be extremely dangerous, and if your instinct tells you that something is wrong, you better listen to it. Except, in this case, my instincts never kicked in. I did not see this man as a threat, at all. Thinking to myself that perhaps it was someone I met over the summer and made friends with, trying really hard to remember his name, I just turned to him and say, "Hey, how has your summer been?" Praying that he'll say something that will jog my memory in regards to him. His face lights up and he just starts talking about random things. When I can't remember him, no matter how hard I try, I just say, "Sorry, but we really have to go now. It's getting late and tomorrow's a school day." I say this while mentally preparing myself that he might not like it, but then he just smiles and says, "Oh, alright, I'll see you around then." I basically drag Kirsten by the arm into my place, all the while she's still laughing and asking me why I never introduced her to my boyfriend. I shush her and tell her that I have never seen this man in my entire life. Kirsten looks at me for a bit, then goes silent and just says, "Huh, that's really weird. I haven't seen him either." Next day, our geography class took place outside. We had to use a compass or something. I can't really remember the details of the class. Not even 10 minutes into the lesson, one of the boys in the class walks up to me and tells me there's a man asking for me. For a second, I'm confused, with the events of yesterday already forgotten. But as soon as I turn around, I see the man from yesterday standing among my classmates looking at me, and everything that happened the day before comes flooding back to me. Now, all of my classmates are good-naturedly making fun of me, asking me to introduce my new hot boyfriend to them. Even the teacher says jokingly that I will have to tell my boyfriend to wait until the classes are over. At this point, I'm just really tired, so I just walk up to him and tell him that I'm in class right now and he really shouldn't be on the school grounds if he's not a student. He immediately tells me that he's got a car nearby and that he can drive me home. I just tell him that I'm planning on walking home as the weather is nice, but he's welcome to walk with me and my friends. And sure enough, after my classes end, he's right there, waiting for me. Normally, I walk home with a group of 4 friends, so with an addition of this weird man, we can't all walk next to each other. He walks ahead of us, occasionally looking back and asking about my school day, about my grades, etc. Completely harmless questions, no weird compliments. No weird anything, except for the fact that I still don't know who this man is. The same evening, my phone rings, a call from an unknown number. I answer and hear a familiar voice go, "Hey, did you get home alright?" I ask if one of my friends gave him my number, and this time he sounds almost hurt when he says, "No, you gave it to me. How can you not remember?" Again, we talk for a little bit, mostly about my grades and school. I'm not going to drag the story out too much, but this man called me every single day, followed me to school, and sometimes even in school. Every day, he walked home with us after school. He found me when I was out with my friends. He always knew when my extracurriculars would end. He was always there, everywhere, every single day. Until one day in November, I left my house to go to school, looking around, and I couldn't see him. The whole day passed, and he was nowhere to be found. As weird as it sounds, I was concerned, thinking whether something happened to him. I never found out. As I said, it's been over 16 years now, and I never saw that man again, and everyone I spoke to about it vowed that they did not know him either. I used to work at a Southern California ski resort called Mountain High as a snowmaker. One day, there wasn't much work, so they had us do whatever we could to stay busy. All of a sudden, we hear on the radio that there is possibly a dead person in their car, so me, my friend, along with other people that worked there, ran to the parking lot to see if there really was a dead person in their car. As soon as we got there was a man who looked in his 20s, possibly Middle Eastern, slumped over against the driver's door with his hands still on the wheel and the car still on. The ski patrol somehow got the door open and had to pry his stiff fingers off the steering wheel as rigor mortis had already set in. His body was stiff as a board and his arms were still in driving position while he was out on the stretcher. His upper lip was curled back, exposing his upper teeth, which looked super disturbing and creepy. As soon as they pulled him out, he shit, pissed, and threw up everywhere, and they took him to the ski patrol room. Ski patrol took turns giving him CPR and throwing up in a trash can, but they couldn't save him as he was already dead. The most disturbing part is that the family of this man were right there as this all happened, screaming, crying, and praying out loud that he would be okay when it was obvious that he was already dead. It turns out the man had diabetes and went snowboarding with his friends the night before and said he didn't feel so good and went alone to his car. However, he didn't have his insulin and he passed out and died in the car overnight. For some reason, the friends didn't even care to look for him. After the incident, the man's body was put in a generator room overnight since the ambulance for some reason couldn't make it. Now, whenever I see someone asleep in their car, I always think of the dead man. The dead guy's name was Leo, and it happened, I believe, the season of 1819. Rest in peace, Leo. To preface this, I love to drive. Like, hour-long drives to nowhere with no destination in mind, just me, my music, and the road ahead of me. Living in Nebraska, I'd often take back roads or lonely highways cutting through the countryside to small towns and eventually cities. I'd usually take these drives at night since there was way less traffic to worry about. I've done it since I've had my license 4-5 years ago, and I've never once had any sort of issue, nor have I ever run into any trouble. That was until a few nights ago. For reference, I'm a relatively small 22-year-old female, and as I've stated before, I often take these drives completely and utterly alone. They're a good way to clear my head when I'm stressed, upset, or overwhelmed, or for me to get a plan together to sort my personal issues out. I've also done these long and lonely drives to get away from the toxicity of my household when I used to live with my parents as a means of coping with their alcoholism. Though now that I moved out, I'm in a much better place mentally, and I don't really have the urge to get in my car and just drive anymore. However, on the night this event took place, I was feeling pretty overwhelmed, stressed, and anxious with a clusterfuck of personal issues I'd rather not get into. I felt restless and irritable around my boyfriend, couldn't focus on anything else, and I decided I would take a drive to clear my head. My boyfriend was understanding and told me to be careful and not to be gone for too long since it was getting pretty late anyway. I agreed, gave him a kiss goodbye, and left. I drove around the city for about 30 minutes, but I was still feeling on edge about everything transpiring in my personal life, so I decided to drive further north down those familiar, dark, winding, one-lane highways. I kept the car at a steady 65 miles per hour, taking the turns at a slower pace just in case a deer jumped out from around the bend. I was just admiring the vast, empty darkness of the snow-capped fields and barren trees. It was honestly a bit creepy being all alone with no cars in sight, in seemingly the middle of nowhere. The few houses miles away from the road, lightless, and the dead cornfields withered away and covered in snow. It was like something in a horror movie, and I half expected to see a ghost pop up in my rearview mirror or see someone clamber out of the patches of trees dotting the horizon. The only light came from my headlights, and even then I still strained to see through the inky darkness of the night. By now, it was just after 11, and I told myself that once I made the familiar roundabout that would either take you to a small town or back up towards the city, that I would head back to the city and home. That roundabout was still maybe 15 to 25 minutes away, but other than my imagination picturing the worst, I wasn't really all that concerned. I mean, I was by myself. I didn't have any other motorists to worry about, right? Wrong. As I'm rounding another bend, I notice a vehicle with its hazards flashing maybe a quarter of a mile or something away from me. It was some sort of sedan, dark coloured, and was angled where only part of it was on the shoulder while the rest was jutted out onto the road like they had to pull over in a hurry but didn't quite manage to do that. The driver's side door was flung wide open. As I slowed down my vehicle and angled it towards the opposite side of the road to pass, I could make out what looked like blood on the inside of the open door. I didn't see anyone on the road or in the car, and I was the only motorist in sight. Cell phone reception is spotty at best in this part of the country, but more often than not, you couldn't get reception no matter how hard you prayed. This was definitely the case when I took a glance at my phone to see if I had any service. So, a lone female on the road, at night, pulling up to a near vacant vehicle that looks like someone had been attacked on the inside with no cell service. Now, I'm no dummy. I've watched countless episodes of Investigation Discovery and Criminal Minds and read far too many true crime books to know that this had bad and danger written all over it. But there was still a small part of me that worried that something terrible would happen to whoever was in that vehicle, and I thought I needed to help. These roads don't get a lot of traffic late at night, and temperatures were well below freezing. If someone was hurt or in trouble, there was no one and nothing else to help them but me. Still, I erred on the side of caution. I was still driving my car, though a bit more slowly, and as I approached the vehicle, I rolled down my passenger window a bit, shut off the music, and called out, "Hey, anyone there? You okay?" I didn't hear a response. I worried they were passed out somewhere, but I wasn't about to get out and look for them. I told myself I'd call out one last time, and if I didn't hear anything, I would leave, and the moment there was reception, I'd call it in to the police. And if I did hear someone, well, I'd figure out my next course of action then. So again, I shouted, "Hey, what happened? Are you okay?" There was silence for a bit, and then I heard rustling in the shadows of the trees, followed by a gruff voice saying, "Yeah." I was relieved at first, and was about to say something in response, or possibly even get out my car and help. Then, I noticed three things nearly simultaneously. As I inched my way past the front of the sedan, I noticed there was no damage to the hood or anywhere else on the vehicle, which I found to be strange considering the blood on the inside of the door. In my rearview mirror, I caught a glance of someone coming out from behind the sedan, and they were making their way towards my car, fast. The person did not have any blood on them or appeared to be injured in any way. They were wearing a mask. Not like a face mask for COVID or ski mask or anything normal, but one of those masks you would see in the Purge movies. They were also holding something in their hand. I don't know what it was, as I couldn't really get a good look, but from its length and shape, my guess was maybe a tire iron or a crowbar or something. I don't need to tell you that I slammed on the gas the moment I noticed those things and drove like a bat straight out of hell, my heart thundering in my chest and my entire body shaking. My window was still rolled down in my haste and the music was still shut off, so I could clearly hear someone, definitely a man, shouting at me, though I had no clue what they were saying. I just knew I had to get out of there immediately. I stole one last look in my rearview mirror as I drove away, mostly to see if they were getting in their sedan to follow chase or if they had stopped. The man with the weapon was still standing in the middle of the road watching me, and right before I looked away from the mirror, I saw a second man emerge from the trees that had been rustling earlier, also wearing one of those creepy masks with no trace of blood on him. I probably broke every law for speeding that night, but I wanted to get as far away from those men as possible. As soon as I made it to the roundabout, I turned towards town, parked in the Walmart parking lot that thankfully still had cars from who I assumed were workers closing up shop, and proceeded to have a full-on meltdown. When I could pull myself together, I called one of my friends, T, who was a police officer, to tell him what happened and what I should do. He was concerned for me, and after asking if I was okay, where I was, did they follow me, etc. He told me that since it was out of city limits, he couldn't do much on his end, but he got in contact with the local police/sheriff in that jurisdiction to take my statement and check it out. I agreed, thanked him, and while I waited for the police to show up, I called my boyfriend. Through my hysterical sobs and panic, I managed to tell him what happened not even 10 or so minutes ago. He was, as you could imagine, super freaked for my safety and wanted me to either come home immediately or drive down himself to take me home. I told him the police were on their way to take my statement, so I couldn't leave and that I was okay, but I stayed on the phone with him until I saw the familiar police cruisers pulling into the lot. I gave the police my statement and they assured me they would go back to the spot I told them the sedan had been at to take a look and see if they could catch the guys who did it. Though, with no cameras and no description of the men, I wasn't sure they'd be able to. I didn't even get the license plate number, though at the time of my panic, the thought never came into my mind until the police were asking if I got it. All they had to go off was a dark coloured sedan and two guys with masks. After I gave my statement, I went home and stayed curled up close to my boyfriend the whole night, listening to every sound the house made in fear it would be those guys arriving any minute to finish whatever they started. Since the incident, I haven't heard back from the police about whether or not they had any leads, and I'm not sure they ever will. I'm just thankful I'm still here and that I didn't stop my car or get out. I'm really not sure what would have become of me if I had. I still have so many questions that have no answers. What were they doing? Why? Was that blood on the inside of the car, or just a ruse to get more attention? If it was really blood, did they hurt someone else? What would have happened to me if I stopped my car? Needless to say, I won't be going on any more late night drives to anywhere, and I hope I never cross paths with those freaks again. Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, all I ask is that you consider to like and subscribe. Also, leave a comment down below on what your favourite story was and if you'd like to see more of these type of videos. And as always, I wish you guys all the best and I'll catch you in the next video. See ya.